following us with the live stream on the website and the social media streams as well. My name is Sasha, Vakulina, I'm Euronews business editor, and I'm going to be moderating this session today with the speakers, and that's my great pleasure and honor to introduce them to all of you now. So, we have here Jean-Erik de Zagon, resident representative in Ukraine European Investment Bank. We have Olena Bilan, chief economist, Zagon Capital. And we have Hunder, president, American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine. And this session will last just over an hour, and we're going to be discussing economic security, growing sustainable business and investment in Ukraine. As many of the speakers here would agree, this is not just a $1 billion question, that's kind of multi-billion-dollar question on how to do so. And to start this session, I would like to ask for all our speakers to come up with some sort of opening and introductory statement, particularly on your assessment of the current state of Ukraine's economy. Because when it comes to where we are now, Ukraine, as all the countries in Europe, as everywhere in the world, we're just finally getting out of this 1.5 years of the whole pandemic, COVID-19 economic crisis, with all the consequences, of course. Ukraine economy last year contracted by 4%, the National Bank for this year forecasting 3.1% growth, that's for 2021. The International Monetary Fund is a little bit more optimistic, 3.5%. But even with this more optimistic forecast, of course, this is not enough to offset the losses of last year. I would like to hear your assessment of the current state of Ukraine's economy, because of course this is what we need to do before we go into how to improve the situation, how to make it grow and how to make it grow sustainably. Let's start.
Sure. We have been speaking about that a lot, but the first thing if you want to have the economy growing is the rule of law. You will not have investments if people don't feel that assets that they own in the country are protected, and you will not have growth if the rightful claim they can have on somebody cannot be enforced by jurisdiction. So we have been saying that a lot, but it's really key if you want to have investment is to be sure that the rule of law can be respected. The second part, in my opinion, where that will favor economic growth is infrastructure. You need still to build infrastructure in Ukraine. You will not have business if you cannot transport, if you don't have supply of energy, and so on and so on. On that one, I think there's very, very strong progress has been done. And for example, all the IFIs and the IB especially is very happy to continue to support Ukraine in building the infrastructure that is needed. The third one is human capital. You need to have human capital if you want to develop the economy. I think it's one of the strengths of Ukraine. I think human capital overall is quite good in Ukraine. You have very good engineers, you have well-educated people. There's more to be done, and again, the EIB, for example, is very happy to assist on that, on the education program and so on. But that one, in my opinion, is one of the strengths. Now, there's one danger on that one. When I speak to many mayors, for example, in cities, they say, yes, but very good to train people are living, either they're living to Kiev, or they're living to Germany, to Poland, and so on. And that's a danger. My question to these mayors is always the same, is what do you do for the municipal infrastructure? If you want to retain people in Ukraine, educated people, you have to provide them with municipal transport, you have to provide them with schools, with hospitals and so on. And again, there's something I think where EIB is very happy to help. But it's key. You will not have good people, educated people, if you don't have municipal infrastructure. And the fourth one is obviously very important. One is money. Now, if you look at that, you have to make a separation. If you take the very large companies, the very large use of infrastructure, I think they can access money. The large companies, private companies, they can go to the markets, they can go to international banks. The state, for the large amount of money, they go to the IFIs and they can produce money. Where you have a problem is for the medium and small companies. There, and it's not that there's no money. I think the Ukrainian banking system has a lot of liquidity today. The international banking system has a lot of liquidity. The problem is to channel, to distribute this money to the smaller companies. And there they need, in my opinion, to be further development in the capital market and in the banking sector in Ukraine, how we can channel this money to the entrepreneurs, to smaller companies, being risk capital, being banking loans and so on. But then you come back to my first point, which is the rule of law. Banks, venture capitalists do not feel comfortable to give money to companies if you don't have the rule of law. If they are not sure that this small company can protect the assets they own and can also claim rightfully the claims they have or the rights they have. So this is really the starting point. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the four important things: the rule of law, the infrastructure, the human capital, and the money. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to focus a little bit, obviously, more further in our conversation, particularly on the infrastructure investment and the SMEs, as we discussed a bit earlier. Olena, what's your take on your assessment? Because that's, I believe, your area of expertise, particularly when it comes to the current state of Ukraine's economy and where we are now, so that we could, by implementing some of the ideas and more, we can make it grow better and more sustainable. What's the assessment nowadays from you?
Yeah, actually, now it's very easy and pleasant to talk about Ukraine's economy because it's getting stronger and stronger each year. So, and for me personally, it's a big pleasure to observe these developments and to see that the economy is becoming more resilient in general, and we saw it last year. So, as you mentioned, Ukraine's economy contracted by 4%. But we should also remember that the global economy contracted by more than 3%. And this comes in a contrast with what happened 10 years ago in 2008-9 global financial crisis. So the global economy didn't contract, it was zero growth. And Ukraine's economy collapsed by 15%. So now we are really at absolutely different conditions. The banking system is much stronger thanks to clean up and reform. Our agricultural sector has grown much stronger and now is really one of the biggest supplier of foreign currency. And of course the global demand for food is very stable. The prices may fluctuate, but this agriculture exports provides a lot of stability and resilience. So the problem is that we have become more stable, but now we need to catch up and we need to speed up growth, because growing at 3-4% is actually okay, but is not probably sufficient to catch up with Poland or Romania or Bulgaria, with our neighbors who were on a stable growth path for the several decades already. So this is, I think, the key issue, but it's a very complex issue because what would be the sources of this growth? Ukraine's qualified workers live in the country. They go to Poland, they go to Czech Republic, to actually to Belgium, as I learned yesterday. And according to the official estimate, we have a population of 41 million people. But the government has conducted its survey several years ago, and it's concluded it's 37 million actually. But also there are estimated that there is about 5 million migrants who are not here in Ukraine, who are not generating value-added or economic growth here, but they're generating economic growth in Poland or in Italy or in other European countries. So maybe there are only 32 million of us who have to kind of somehow make the economy growing. So it's not the labor that will probably push growth forward. We are already at a very high stage of development of capital, I would say, so definitely we are not an African country that lacks electricity, so the only source of growth, I think, is a productivity growth. And this would require investment, and as was correctly said before, investment not only, and machinery, etc., but investment in infrastructure, investment in building human capital capacity, etc.
Thank you so much, and it's really, I have to say, for everybody here on stage and in the room, I'm sure that it's a great pleasure to hear the fact that Ukraine economy is now doing so much better and has been improving so much for the past few years. And also we have to say that if we do comparison, for example, with the 2008 global financial crisis, of course the substance and the structure of the economy is indeed much stronger than it used to be back in 2008. Andy, let's go into your assessment. I'm going to bring you the recent from the September 2021, the survey by AmCham and City Ukraine Business Climate Survey Post-Pandemic Horizon. 90% of business representatives gave an upbeat forecast on their company's financial health at the end of 2021. 62% said they will achieve planned financial results. Now that is impressive.
Yeah, there is this sense of optimism, and I think what Olena says, the numbers, and we see this general, optimism. Out of those 90%, 62% will hit their financial targets, 28% will overachieve, so that they will actually do better than predicted. Okay, arguably you may say it was a COVID year, so some of the forecasts, the numbers they put in their budgets were quite conservative. But I think still, they are achieving, or even 28% are overachieving the numbers. So, the American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, next year we're celebrating 30 years that we've been here. So what we've seen over the last 3 decades, what we're seeing this year, there is, quite a lot of optimism. We're seeing new members joining. We've had 80 new companies join this year alone.
Let me interrupt you here a little bit. The optimism you're talking about, is it the one that is coming from the rebound after the crisis of COVID-19, or is it the more optimism there, given the state and the growth and the whole development of Ukraine's economy, apart from the COVID-19 rebound?
I think it's both. I think we are seeing definitely a bit of predictability post-COVID, but I think the message about Ukraine and what investors are looking at, they are looking at the first thing they ask is who is in Ukraine already, and that's so the best ambassadors Ukraine has are the companies, the multinational companies working on the ground here. Because they go to the companies and they say, okay, tell us the story, yes? And they come to us and, we don't sell the promise, we don't sell the dream. We tell the story of the companies that are here. And, again, we have the good, we have the bad, we have the ugly. And I think it's balancing those messages. Very often, the ugly we hear very quickly, the bad we also hear. But I think sometimes when we sit down, in the morning the phone rings and saying, Andy, we've got a problem. And then, coming to us, seeing, what we can do to get their messages across to the government. But I think, when you sit down in the afternoon, have a cup of tea, and you ask how business is, some big companies saying it's excellent, it's very good. So I think it's really, and I think, sometimes it is important for Ukraine to get that message out, because, there is a lot of good news happening, but sometimes it is overshadowed by the bad news. So what is the bad news? The bad news, absolutely, I mean, the number one obstacle is rule of law. Rule of law is the number one issue that comes up survey after survey. So I think, and we
And it's been like that for years as well.
Absolutely. So
it's not like it's changed, over the course of the last, for example, 10 years. In every year annual surveys, we do see the rule of law there in the top 3.
Yes. And I think, we are hopeful, and I think some of the comments that were made yesterday, we are hoping that now with the judicial reform, we will see some tangible changes. We're very hopeful, and I think, the G7 and everyone coming together and pushing across. But I think it's vital, it's critically important. Foreign direct investment is critical for Ukraine's economic security. And I think, what needs to be done to boost that is to have the rule of law in place. So that's why we're sort of, everyone is pushing this message. But at the same time, it's balancing between the good news and, listening to the companies, the ambassadors that are here already, but also those that are coming to Ukraine today.
Okay, let's go a little bit more into the rule of law, because of course this is something that we have to discuss, and that's again, every year in all the surveys in the past 10 years, or even more, we do hear from businesses, bigger and smaller businesses, about the importance of the rule of law, and that's what they want to see. At the same time, recently, over a few years, we do see some reforms and some steps towards that. We've seen few of those done by the authorities and the governments. What do you think about the steps that have been done already? Some of the reforms, some of the changes when it comes to the judicial system and so on. I would expect you to say that it's good, but it's not enough. But I want you to tell me, what is it that you would want to see happening more? What would be the next step? But practically speaking, what would be the next step, taking into consideration the steps taken already?
Well, I think it's absolutely true that we have seen a lot of progress, a lot of reform in Ukraine, and they are going on and they are continuing. The problem is that if you are a big player, maybe today you feel comfortable. If you can afford to wait for a payment, for getting, for example, something very simple, take the VAT. If you can wait a long time to get the VAT back, you're going to be fine, because you will get it back. Maybe you're going to use a lawyer, you're going to go to court, but you will get it back, because I think that is respected. But if you cannot afford to wait for 6 months, 9 months, you're in trouble. So I think if you're a big player, I think today the rule of law is maybe enough. You can hire good lawyers and you can go, and probably things are going to happen. If you're a medium-sized small player, it's not enough, in the sense that your rights will not be recognized easily and quickly. People, if they are big, they're gonna take you to court, knowing that you don't have the money to pay for this process in court for 1 year and so on. And that is the issue. You have to go down really much more. And that is very difficult. That the small players have to feel comfortable that the first judge that you will meet is going to be impartial. And that is key. And it's a long process, it's difficult, but that's how I see it.
Thank you. Olena?
Well, I would say that it's very important to defend the achievements made so far. These are great achievements. Okay, we always say it's not enough, but if you look at what has been done before 2014 and after 2014, I think it's a huge difference. And for me as an economist, the reform of the central bank was of crucial importance. And this is something, the independence of the central bank, the inflation targeting regime needs to be maintained and defended because this reform had a multiplicative impact on the economy, and I think one of the main reasons why we are in a new kind of more stable state. So actually the independence of central banks means that the fiscal policy needs to be prudent. So there is no money printing, so the government has to run low budget deficit because it has constraints. So this is defending what has been achieved is very important. And then I think the next very important thing is to implement all these great legislative changes that has been approved over past years, including the changes to the judicial legislation and National Anti-Corruption Bureau and others. So, as someone said, approving legislation is a 5% of a success in a reform. So we are now need to do the 95%. And this is what I think should be a priority.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. So it's really seeing, what tangible, results. I think the issue, the number one issue, the rule of law is the courts. Can you get a free and fair hearing in a court in Ukraine today? I think that's what, it's not looking for any privileges, it's just asking for, a fair hearing and a fair decision. I think, I would mention some good news that we have seen, especially with our latest liaison and work with the General Prosecutor's Office. They have set up a relatively new investment protection office. And so we do bring, unfortunately, quite a large number of cases. They review them. And then sometimes they themselves say, well, goodness, who initiated these cases? And they close the cases. So I think, it's just, bringing it to their attention escalating it to the top, either to the General Prosecutor herself or her department in terms of investment protection. And I think that's important. We're doing something similar now with the Minister Monastyrsky with the Ministry of Interior. You know, just getting the voice of business across to government, that is what the Chamber of Commerce does. And it's, you know, helping our, you know, the members to have, you know, a fair hearing in the courts.
Of course. Let's, I'm going to read you here the latest available, put it that way, progress for Ukraine when it comes to the investment climate indicators of the World Bank's Doing Business Index. Of course, the latest available is the one for 2020, which was, of course, a very hard year for Ukraine and for all the other countries and for the global economy in general. Ukraine now, well, as of 2020, ranks the 64th out of 190 economies in the Doing Business 2020 report, gaining 7 places compared to the previous year, to 2019. That is a progress, and this progress has been rather constant. Every year we're still yet to hear about this year one, but we do see this progress going. When it comes to investment, let's go into the sectors of the investment when it comes to Ukraine's economy. Historically, of course, we do have big sectors. We have energy, we have agriculture, we have technology. I've got a question to all of you now. So what are your top 3 rather bigger and more predictable sectors when it comes to investing in Ukraine's economy? And what are those top 3 for each of you, the sectors that might be now underrepresented or underestimated when it comes to Ukraine's economy and investing here by foreign investors?
I think that the first one is, we talk a lot about agriculture, but where I think that has to be more to be done and should be done is on the added value. I mean, it's one thing to export grains, it's one thing to export oils, but you can do better than that. In the sense, I think that the whole agri-food business should be much more developed. I mean, I think you have all the resources for that. So that is the first one. I mean, the IT, everybody's been talking about that, so that I will not. But that, for me, is one of the big things in Ukraine that you can certainly do much more, in the IT sector. But coming back, I think, to more fundamental things, I think that where I see a potential is also in education. I think that Ukraine there's a lot of demand for education in Ukraine, where we discussed that yesterday evening. It's quite expensive also to some extent. And I think that that is a business area. I think people want to be educated in Ukraine. I think you have a tradition of having high qualified people. And I think that is definitely an area where I think you can do better. Then I also think that in the health sector, there's much more things to be done. I think it's an important area where I think that you see big difference between cities, you see big difference between cities and the countryside and so on. And I think that is certainly an area where you can develop. And both this one, education and the healthcare system, I think is undervalued today. And I think that, we see figures progressing on the economy. When you have a strong middle class growing, these are the kind of demand they want to have. They're going to have demand on education. They're going to have demand on the health sector. This, in my opinion, are important sector for the business.
Yeah, from my side, I think we have a couple of sectors which everybody is talking about. This is agriculture and IT. And I agree that when we're talking about agriculture, it's more relevant to talk about agri-food in general. And food is kind of more important part than agriculture, because I think what Ukraine needs is to increase the number of products that it exports, and not commodities, but really products with higher share of value added. So we need to produce goods here and import them and export them to other countries. But also, I think that logistics is one of the sectors where there is a very good potential. But other than that, I think the investors probably are more kind of look at special cases at companies, but not sectors in general. So there are good companies in many small sectors which play a very small part of the economy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we look at agriculture, that starts from factories like in Cortiva in Moldova, where they produce the seeds. So sunflower seeds and corn seeds, and then you have the crop protection, then you have the machinery, the green tractors, the red tractors that cultivate the combine harvesters. Then you have the biggest challenge we see so far is how do you get from the field to the global markets. So the infrastructure, the roads and the limits now on the weight controls on the trucks, which is good because I think the roads are being built, so we have to keep them in a good condition. But again, the railways and so the river transports. I mean, last year Parliament passed this law on internal waterways. The Dnipro can very easily become a major artery with barges, loaded with sunflower, corn, or any sort of products, a trade artery going down to the Black Sea. And again, it is the foods and with the agriculture, you've got the traders, but I think the value add. I mean, here in neighbouring Mykolaiv, we were there recently, and PepsiCo. PepsiCo had two large plants where they make the carbonated waters and the juices. But until last year, they were importing all the potato chips from Poland. And Ukraine, an agricultural country that grows potatoes, number one in the world for sunflower oil to fry them. And bingo, you make it local. So it is, that's really the message. What is the next step? So it's not just the sunflower oil or the corn or the wheat or the soya that's being exported as bulk commodities. But it is, adding the value add. Secondly, IT definitely. Again, it's doing exceptionally well with $5 billion of exports year on year. A challenge there is people. We have some members. One company has 900 vacancies open today. 900 vacancies, and they are looking. Where are they going to get these people from? So I think that is strategically looking. Because I think that the people issue is there, and it's getting, and it can get more and more serious. Finally, I was speaking to friends and colleagues in Poland the other day, and they are looking to open up a new factory for 4,000 people in Poland. And the number one question they have also is where are they going to get the people from? And they're already looking at Ukraine to go to that factory which hasn't been built yet.
Yeah, and it takes us as well into the aspect of the people, of course, and what we discussed earlier. Now, we do have these days the news agenda, and I want to ask all of you about that. That is, of course, the current situation with energy and everything that's been happening in Ukraine, of course, at the forefront. When it comes to this transatlantic partnership, when it comes to the cooperation with the European Union, the US, but the EU particularly, when it comes to energy sector, let's touch upon this aspect. When it comes to the European Investment Bank, of course, energy sector is so important. When it comes to total financing by sectors, by the European Investment Bank, the third biggest will be energy, more than 18.5%. Let's talk about energy as an important factor and aspect of building and strengthening the cooperation between Ukraine and the EU.
Sure, it's definitely one of the key ones. Now, EIB, the EU bank, we are also a climate bank. So what we also would try to support in Ukraine is a transformation from the classical fossil energy that we don't finance anymore to more sustainable energy. If we take Ukraine, I think today there is one big aspect in the energy sector. It's the electricity. We have a situation today in Ukraine with Ukraine, and there is a structural deficit in the system, and we cannot have that one continuing. There must be a solution about Ukraine is a transport company for electricity. It cannot accumulate losses. Losses is coming maybe from the fact that the price do not reflect the cost for the private people. And that is something Ukraine has to do something about. There must be a strategy what you do with the tariff of electricity. I think the bank has full respect for the fact that some households need to be subsidized. That's fine, that's a political decision. But the price itself has to reflect the cost of electricity. We also know that some very important industrial groups have maybe very good contract for taking the electricity. And all these kind of things has to be reflected on how that can be organized. So again, also this big, so I could pay the fair price for electricity. Then we come to the other aspect, which is the renewable. I mean, we all know the story about the renewable sector, that there's also accumulating losses. I mean, EIB has not been engaged in renewable in Ukraine so far. The reason was that we had a feeling at that time that the price of charges were too high. If you compare to the rest of Europe, we compare to Spain, for example, where we had that problem before. So the bank has not been engaged in renewable. However, we think it has to be sorted out. I mean, you have investors have been investing with very good tariffs, and we think that's important that it's sorted out. So the first thing is that we think that this problematic we have with structural losses in electricity must be sorted out. Second thing is that the ambassador of the EU spoke about it yesterday, is the grid itself. We think that it would be a very, very good thing if it could be connected 23 as foreseen to the EU grid. That is, in my opinion, a very important step for Ukraine. Then also, there's a need for continued investment in the electricity grid in Ukraine, in the sense that you have to balance it. The system is still unbalanced. There has to be investment to balance the grid, and that will be even much stronger if you have more smaller producers of renewable energy. The need for balancing the grid is going to be even bigger. So to summarize it for the grid is that there is a structural deficit today. It has to be sorted out, and quickly so, because there is a need for investment to continue on the grid. The one I would like to add, since the bank is out of all fossil energy, is hydrogen. I think that Ukraine has a huge potential on hydrogen. I think the bank is very happy to support it. To produce hydrogen, you need to have wind energy. The solar in Ukraine, the wind energy in Ukraine have very high potential. And you have the third element that you need, energy transfer. Then you need to have water. I mean, you have so much water in Ukraine going out in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. And that is water you can use to produce hydrogen. And the third component that you have all these gasoducts that you can convert into the transport of hydrogen. So I think that on the energy sector, hydrogen has a huge potential for Ukraine because you can produce it and you can transport it.
Thank you. Olena, what's your name?
I have nothing to add. It really was a great overview.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, 52% of the electricity here is generated by nuclear. So these beautiful chandeliers above our heads, every second light bulb is generated, the electricity comes from nuclear. I think in nuclear we're also seeing the fuel now with Westinghouse and even the spent nuclear fuel, the storage. There can be a lot of cost savings made on that. But in terms of upstream, unfortunately, no majors left in Ukraine. They were here, they're not here today. Midstream, yes, I think Ukraine has some of Europe's largest storage facilities and opportunities there. Downstream, we do see the retail sector, the petrol stations there, they're doing quite well. But again, it is the renewables. And the issue with especially the solar, but the wind also was the promises that were made to the investors saying, come on in. And I think the trust has been broken. I mean, it's a long story. I think many of us sort of know the details about the tariff, how high it was. But I think the issue is now, how do we regain that trust from the government to the investors in the energy sector, that the government can be trusted?
No, I have nothing to add on that issue. I wish we had more time also to focus on the energy situation, of course, because it's such a burning issue on the international agenda, but I have to bring up another question here, otherwise we're going to run out of time, and I still want to hear the questions from the audience. And the other issue, and I'm going to stay here with you for a second, on the International Monetary Fund and its presence in Ukraine and its importance in so many different aspects. I'm going to quote you, Andy, here. From a few weeks ago, you said that the International Monetary Fund is not about the financing, but just for the trust and for having trust from internal and also foreign investors when it comes to Ukraine's economy. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about the importance of the IMF presence in Ukraine here as the trust to the internal foreign investors.
Yeah, why the IMF is so important to Ukraine? It is a seal of approval to investors looking at the country. So I think that is what they're looking at. And very often when investors do come in, always they ask, what is the latest? So we just had the decision that was made last week in terms of the group, and now we're waiting for the final sign-off. But it is, again, it's the seal of approval. And it's the reforms. Very tangible, why these reforms are needed in various sectors, including the banking sector, which we've seen great reform happening. I think since 2015, the number of banks that have been closed down and really the reform of the banking sector, there's been excellent work. And I think now it's just so important to keep that going. No way to let it roll back, but just keep on forward. And I think it's good. This is something that's helping Ukraine. And this isn't being done for the international organizations. This is being done for Ukrainians. And that's why it's so important. And so we are optimistic, and we do hope to get a final decision, to hear the final decision soon. But again, this is the seal of approval, IMF, that the investors are looking for.
Thank you. Olena, are you optimistic of that? Because you said about the fact that even the special COVID aid by the IMF, that's already a good sign for Ukraine, and it will help us keep going for a while.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question about whether Ukraine should continue cooperation with the IMF, because the economy got stronger. We have a good external position, so the central bank reserves are high. Shall we work with the IMF, or we can kind of graduate from the IMF program? And also, I think in the previous panel there was a question: is the Ukraine borrowing too much or not? I think we should. I actually agree with Andy that, of course, the IMF is a seal of kind of quality, and a seal that the country is heading in the right direction. But also, despite all these positives in the economy, we still have quite substantial funding needs. Ukraine still depends on borrowings, on external credit markets, and the IMF program and the financing from other IFIs reduces the cost of these borrowings. Just for you to compare, the EU has disbursed 600 million of budget support just earlier this week at the interest rate of 0.25%. Ukraine borrows at external markets at more than 6%. So this is a huge difference, and the financing that is provided by the IFIs is a long-term financing. For instance, the EU financing is for 15 years. So this is also not only a seal, it's also a source of cheap and long-term financing for the budget. And actually, this year's budget is in very good shape. And I think that the deficit for this year will be around 3% of GDP, maybe even less, though the government targeted 5.2% of GDP. But anyway, like 3% of GDP is $6 billion, and we also have to repay external debt. So for the next several years, we need to borrow annually about $10 billion per year. And shall we do it at 6%, or shall we do it at 0.2?
What is the take of the European Investment Bank when it comes to this? Because at the previous session, of course, I'm sure you were listening to the Vice President of the European Commission and his take on the IMF, and that in some cases the IMF is not fully probably understand. I'm quoting him here. Is not fully understanding the complexity of the situations. What's your take on the IMF's presence in Ukraine and the importance of it?
Well, I mean, I fully agree. I think we have always said that. I think it's very important what IMF decides to do, not to do in Ukraine. We all watching that. Being the EU bank, obviously, I'm watching also a lot what the microfinancing of the EU, and you mentioned the 600 million, that is very important for me. I mean, if the EU would for any reason say no, I'm not doing the same thing as the EU delegation in the sense that I'm financing a project, but it can be very difficult for the EU bank to say we continue to finance project if the EU says we cannot do it anymore. So obviously what they do is very important. And I think that it's IMF, is G7 and is the EU. I mean, what they push us to reform for the country, the three of them, in my opinion, is very key. And I think IMF is one component of that. So you have the three together, you have the G7 group, and you have the IMF, and you have the EU. And the way they approach, the way they see the reform in the country are very important. Now, one thing is the size of the money, which is substantial. I mean, we talk about big amount, we talk about millions. But it's also the signal they give to the rest. And it's a very dangerous one to some extent also, because if one day, for example, IMF or the EU would say no, it can trigger a lot. I mean, all the investors are looking to that. So this is a very, very serious thing. I mean, if IMF would say yes or no. And I think also what IMF and what the EU is focusing on as conditionalities are very good. I mean, at the end of the day, what they focus on is to reform, to promote democracy, and to promote the free market. So I think what they ask for is quite good for the country by itself. It's not only as bankers, if you want, that they want to be sure to get the money back. I think the criteria they have very often are criteria that should reinforce Ukraine itself. And that's the reason why, for example, EIB, we watch what IMF and what the EU is looking for. Because we know that if these reforms take place, it is good for the country. So that is why I think also the IMF and the EU's macro program is something beneficial for the country, not only the money, but also the fact that they push for reforms, which at the end of the day should be good for the economy.
Thank you. Let's see the questions from the audience. We do have a few questions here. Can we have the mic, please? I'm really looking forward. Just state whom is your question for, please, and we're going to get a few here.
Thank you. This young lady first.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a fascinating discussion. Economist, head of USAID-funded anti-corruption program in Ukraine. Most of the issues that are talked about, I just remember why anti-corruption programs have been on spot of interest for any funds that were coming to Ukraine. Recently asking about the progress and about conditionalities from IMF, or from the EU when it comes to microfinancial aid. Two questions, and then for any members of the panel, two panel members to pick up perhaps. One, potential in privatization of state-owned enterprises, how much that could contribute to healthy development of Ukraine in terms of sustainable development of the economy and then attraction of the investments, and what are the conditions that could make the potential feasible and realizable, so to say, to the fullest. And if any of you could comment perhaps on the importance of possibility of Ukraine joining 3Cs initiative. If we'll look into that project, that's all about infrastructural development, digital projects, it's energy security, and it's connectivity, basically, of the countries in 3Cs, Black, Adriatic, and then Baltic Seas, and then coherence and cohesiveness of the development, and a lot of investment that could be attracted to the projects that are funded within this initiative. Anything that is already circulating about that in terms of your circles of discussions and possibilities would be great to hear about that.
Thank you so much.
I'll take a stab at the first one. I think Ukraine has the second largest number of state-owned enterprises in the world after China. Why? Why should the government be managing sausage factories and other sort of state-owned enterprise? So we clearly say, privatize it. I think our position is very, we have a threefold on transparency. So number one, there should be clear transparency of the asset. What is being privatized, especially all the debts that have been taken, and what is actually being privatized. Secondly, transparency of the process, who is allowed into the data room, why are they there, are they just trying to disrupt the process? And thirdly, transparency of the buyer. Who is the actual ultimate beneficiary that's coming in to acquire this asset? But sell them off, definitely, but in a very transparent sort of triangular way.
Thank you.
And maybe just to add to it, I think that actually the final goal of privatization is not really to attract investment. It's to find an efficient owner of the enterprise. Because I think in Ukraine it's sometimes mixed, so that everybody is talking about the sale price, how much the government actually got, how much money got to the budget. But it's not the key goal. The key goal is really to get rid of this enterprise in the sense that to find a good owner, to make it efficient, to make it productive and less corrupt. Thank you.
I don't think that the EIB has a very strong view of privatization. The strong view of the EIB is very much an EU view, which is that you need competition. You need to have competition in also the sector that support reforms, that support efficiency. Who is the owner? Yes, obviously, why should the state be engaged in some sort of the sector? That is absolutely true. But at the end of the day, I think what we would like to see is competition in also the sector and efficient ownership. If the state remains, if it's a private company, but efficiency is the key one, and corporate governance is one of the big things there.
Thank you. Next question.
All right, thank you. Ben Hodges from CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis. My question, which I would like to pose to all three of you, is about regional economic cooperation. I think there have been several attempts to create platforms or organizations that tried to do that, but none of them seem to have been successful or sustainable for a variety of reasons. So what about Ukraine and Georgia, or Ukraine and Romania? Are there things underway, or could things be done to improve economic prosperity for all three countries on the northern part of Black Sea?
Thank you. Olena, do you want to take that?
I'm really kind of about the economic impact of this, and definitely the more cooperation we have with other countries and more trade we have, the better we are. So it's no doubt this.
Thank you. Regional cooperation.
On the EU level, what we look at is the EU eastern neighboring countries. So for us, if you want, we keep the one outside of the EU for the time being. So we're looking on a global level to Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. That's how we look into it. Now, obviously, we also do compare. The bank is very active in Romania, in Poland, and so on. So we will definitely, I speak to my colleagues all the time who are following Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and so on, and see what you can achieve. But in terms of approach, the strategic approach is very much eastern neighboring countries, and this is this country I just mentioned before.
I might just add something here quickly on the European perspective, that when it comes to, of course, the regional corporations and all these united countries, cohesion is one of such an important aspects of all the European Union policy, and of course that, as you know, is not limited by the European Union. It goes well beyond the borders, and all the countries, whether united in regional or separately, they are of course also part of the bigger European Union cohesion policy, which as of the previous MFF was the third biggest one, so it is huge in terms of the policies.
Yeah, I think sector by sector, I think one of the things we discussed yesterday was the Black Sea. So if there's a large vessels coming in through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea, and they can do a number of stops in neighbouring countries, it makes sense. Because we're seeing the numbers aren't growing in terms of, especially now with everything going on in international trade. But I do think sort of sector by sector, there are neighbouring, friendly neighbouring countries where there is opportunity, and that would put a bigger item on the agenda.
If I may just want to add here, I mean, the fact that we are going more and more looking for projects for the climate and water, for example, there's no border. Climate has no border. So obviously, yes, if, for example, we are thinking about a water project, a large one, we have to take into consideration, for example, Ukraine, Moldova, but also Romania. If we do it the most eastern part, we have to think about the neighbors on that side. So I think to some extent the climate challenge will develop that you can have more look at the region independently of the borders. And the border is a very good example for that.
So,
Do you have a follow-up question?
thanks.
Just keep it brief, please, because we have more coming.
Okay, so the point of my question is there are three economic corridors between Europe and Eurasia. One goes through Russia, one goes through Iran, and one goes through the Black Sea. Georgia should be the portal for both directions, which is exactly why the Kremlin has done everything it can to prevent Georgia developing a major port that can handle the ships that Andy's talking about, which is the source of my question, and why there's no pressure to improve the Danube as a major transportation artery. I mean, not even 10% of the potential is there because there's no pressure, because there's no big ships coming in and out. So this is the point is, how can we look at this as competition against the Russian Federation, so that Germany, France, Netherlands, they start caring about why are there Russian troops in Georgia, why are there Russian troops in Ukraine, why are there Russian troops in Transnistria? Because there's no economic development, and so the parliaments frankly don't care. That's a simplified way to say it. That was the point of my question. I apologize.
That was more about the comment than the follow-up. Thank you for it. Thank you. Can you please pass the microphone? Yes, that's correct.
Hello, I'm Tomi Huth, Executive Director of Martens. I have one question about this long-term perspective which we have now been speaking about, so this EU membership. And one thing what, in the general level has been proposed from EU side or politicians from European Parliament is that why don't we try to change the narrative? Why don't we start to speak more about economic integration? There's discussion about the Norwegian model, and let's take it from there. Because let's face it, the membership issue, the time span is very, very, very long. But then the reaction in, I wouldn't say now the government level, but let's say the political forces important in Ukraine is no, it's kind of rejection. No, it's not because we are not like Norway, whatever. I have a feeling that they don't want to give up this EU membership narrative. They don't want to change it to first economic integration because for various reasons. But from the business point of view, I think it would make a lot of sense for companies to know that there is really a concrete plan for economic integration, that there's a perspective of 10, 15 years. The concrete process and concrete goals, that would be for big and small companies, big motivational factor to invest in Ukraine. So what do you think that the business community would think about such an approach? Economy first.
I mean, I can not do the job of the EU ambassador. He was here yesterday, and I think he answered that question. Now, what I think personally, being an IFI, is that everybody sees the IFIs because we bring a lot of money to the country, being EIB, BRD, World Bank. Now, it's more than that. IFIs, we ask for standards. Every time we do something, we ask for some standards. And for EIB, it's very simple, it's the EU standard. So if we do a project, we want that you look into the impact on the environment, we want that you respect procurement rules of the EU, we want that you look at the social impact and so on. And that's how I see as a bank, how we transform this country, going in the direction of the EU. It's not only the money, it's the dialogue we have every day when we do a project, saying, you have to look into this, you have to respect that. And that is championing the country. And yes, I think that one day you're going to be so close to the EU. I mean, you're going to have all the same criteria, you're going to have all the same standards. So then you have to sort of speak to the ambassador or the people in Brussels again, but you're going to be the same. I mean, you're going to have maybe all the same thing that there is in Poland. So what's the difference at that time? And then you have to ask your Prime Minister to discuss with the Commissioner in Brussels. Again.
Thank you, Olena.
My actually thought on this is that this bringing the European businesses here is not only will not only bring new investment, new technologies. It will also make Ukraine much closer to the EU and will promote reforms. I think that the more companies will be working here, the stronger will be lobby for less corruption, for fair judicial system, for all these positive changes in the country. So, and generally, I think it would be really a great thing if we will have, this push for reforms, not only from from the top, from the government, from the international partners, from IFIs, but also from the small businesses, from people, actually from the bottom. So this, I think, will need to be united. So not only pushing it from the up, but also from
all sides, yeah. And
Yeah, I would just add that in our survey, 53% of our members do see geopolitical uncertainties as a risk. And the challenges we find is when the risk manager sits in New York and they read the news that there's an escalation, or President Zelensky's interview, I don't know if it was with you, Sasha, when he said about the potential war with Russia. The risk managers are calling their GMs here, we were in Uzhhorod, and they get a call. And they're almost saying, have a look out the window, are the Russian tanks in Uzhhorod? So I think it's these perceptions. So I think it's really, especially when the risk managers, it's getting the geopolitical, it is an issue. And I think those that don't know the region or the country well enough, they have these perceptions. And we do see that as a challenge.
thank you. And thank you everybody for the questions as well. I'm just going to add from my side that of course we have touched upon some of the issues when it comes to improving and strengthening the cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union, foreign investors, bigger, small and internal investors, the United States and all the companies working there, talking about the transatlantic, of course, ties and cooperation, and all in all, at the end of the day, that all goes into the raising prosperity for Ukrainians and everybody here as well. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you for participating with the questions. Wish we had more time as usual and looking for the next conversation. Thank you, Bruna.
It was a fascinating conversation. It left me with a lot of food for thoughts. And talking about food, it's time to eat. So there is a networking lunch waiting for you in actually where we do the coffee breaks. So there's a buffet there, and we'll see you again at 1:15. So thank you very much. Bon appetit.
Thank you.
Nerede yemek? Şura dediğin yerler.